Our field is a bit in trouble right now. A third of therapists out there, professional therapists, aren't very good. I would even say they stink. They see way too many clients. They're really not affecting change. They're just not worth going to. And they don't even know they're bad. Let's do a deep dive into what's wrong with the mental health world. In that, we're going to talk a little bit about how to fix it. But first, we have to define what's wrong with it. And in this video, we're specifically talking about way upstream with the research. This is pivotal. I get it if this isn't your jam and you don't think you need to geek out on this. But if you or anyone you know has ever been diagnosed with any kind of mental health condition, then you really should spend time watching this video, because even though it's the furthest upstream we can go, it's there that all of the problems are first created. And so everything downstream that has its limitations really started way upstream where I'm taking it. So let's dive in. There's a number of different frameworks we need to talk about. Some of them, if you had a psychology undergrad degree, some of these terminologies will sound familiar to you. If not, this is maybe really new terrain. But I think if you're a clinician, if you're a student, or if you're a client, I think this is going to be really important information for you to consider. And I'll say up front, it's often the most controversial stuff. Open access, let's get controversial, let's dive in. Let's poke the field squarely in the chest and say, folks, you need to fix this, because the harm that it ends up doing to clients, to people, to our society can be minimal, moderate, but also can be extreme. And so, yeah, we need to fix this. So let's dive in. All right. The first thing I want to do is to differentiate and put things on a continuum. This is arguable, but I just want to do this for so that we can talk more elegantly about some of this stuff. So I'm going to put research on one end of the continuum, and there I'm talking about high quality, good research. And that's not all research, trust me. And on this end, I'm going to put more data and statistics. And sometimes, or actually a lot of times, I hear people on social networks, I hear people, even experts on podcasts, they talk about research. They talk about the data shows, research shows, and they use these things interchangeably. And I think in order to have a robust conversation, we need to tease those things apart. That's why I'm putting them on a continuum, because it's not like I'm putting them into boxes or categories. It really is a continuum, and where something falls on that continuum is kind of arguable, but overall we would agree this is further on this end or further on this end. So when I talk about research, the main identifying variable I'm talking about is, does that research and we're talking about robust research. And when we say robust, it means it's been duplicated, and therefore the findings are thought to be robust because they've been duplicated by different scientists in different mediums. So we're talking about robust findings, but also needed for it to be more on this research side of it. Good quality research is not only robust findings, things that have been duplicated, but findings that by themselves already articulate the underlying causal variable. And that is a much higher bar. A lot of social science won't hit that bar, and that doesn't mean the research is worthless. It just might mean it's not fully down on this end. Other research has been really tight in the social sciences. For example, the fundamental attribution error, as far as I know, is a robust finding. It's been duplicated. Or another one would be priming, the priming effect. In other words, if you prime the brain with material, the brain is going to act in accordance to that priming, even if the priming was unknown to the observer. So priming research. There's a lot of research, and priming and fundamental attribution errors. Some of these things were, let's take behaviorism by Skinner and the Skinner box. These things were studied in the 50s and 60s, and they haven't been overturned. So they're important research, but one of the things that is most significant about this research is not only that it's robust, it's been duplicated, but it defines the explanatory variable, or it defines the antecedent. It defines what we say is a mediating variable, the causal variable within the research. And so the fact that the brain can be primed, we know some of the inner workings around that, which is the working memory, the more located towards the front of the brain. The working memory that has been primed is going to access the back brain, the long-term memory files, according to that priming. And so we can really discover the causal variable within that research. That makes it much more not only robust, meaning, of course, it's robust because it's a well understood phenomenon, but the mediating variable, the causal variable, is there. It's not just correlational. Not that research should be thrown out if it's just correlational. That might give us important clues to how the world works, but it's not on the same end. Okay, over here, we have things like data and statistics. And so when we say the data shows, the research shows, we're talking about correlations here. And a lot of social science research fails to, and a lot of research in general, not just picking on social sciences, but a lot of research fails to hit that high of a bar. And so I see a lot of research that talks about demographic variables, for example. And so, for example, Group A doesn't perform as well on IQ tests as Group B. And they show those demographic differences. Group A underperforms in school versus Group B. And the causal variable is not Group A per se. The causal variable is, say, is oppression, right? So where there's oppression on a specific group, that group's going to underperform in many ways. So the fact that these things are correlated doesn't at all demonstrate the underlying attribution here, the underlying antecedent variable or the mediating variable. It only says that Group A underperforms in school, but that's correlational, right? The causal variable is oppression. If you wanted to do research and you wanted to show the effects of oppression, you would set up category, or you would set up condition 1, an oppressive condition, condition 2, a non-oppressive condition, and you would demonstrate the effects of oppression in the lab. In other words, you're creating nature on your command as a researcher, and you're showing the specific effects of this variable on this outcome. That is tight research. And so a lot of research masquerades as research when it's really more like data and correlational and statistics. And then when we get into statistics, now we're really saying, you know, the statistics show that these things are related. But that doesn't tell us much, right? And you're going to see as we go through a lot of these variables why that is. So let's dive in further. Now we have this continuum that sets the playground to now play on. And I'm going to use these ideas further. Okay, so the first thing we want to understand within this continuum is the variable that you're studying, is it operationalized well? So let's say you're in my office and I said, okay, I want you to count how many chairs are in the room. And let's just say for illustration's sake, you didn't know what the word chair meant. Okay, so I said, this is science, this is research, so I need you to be very objective about this. And in this experiment, we're defining a chair as something you can sit on. And your immediate brain might say, oh, well, 1, 2, 3. There are 3 things to sit on. 2 of them are chairs, one's a couch, but you can sit on them. And if you knew chair and you knew it was, I don't know, whatever vision you had in your head, some people might say there's 2 chairs in a room. Some people might say there's 3 because there's a love seat. So 2 to 3, we already have error in our data, right? Because some people record 2, some people record 3. So we already have error in our data. But did they accurately count the number of chairs according to the operationalization, the definition I used, which is a chair is something you can sit on? Well, the table in my office you could sit on. The garbage can in my office, you can sit on that. The floor you could sit on. You could even sit on my lap, which according to that definition, now I am a chair. The floor is a chair. It is something you can sit on. And if you use the definition, a chair is something you can sit on, literally every single thing on the planet is a chair, including a lava field, an active lava field, which you can sit on for about a quarter of a second before it eviscerates you, right? So therefore, what isn't a chair? Nothing. Everything's a chair, maybe except air. Air isn't a chair. You can't sit on air. A cloud you can't sit on, right? So there's very few things that aren't a chair. I hate to break it to you clinicians out there, and I certainly hate to break it to clients and folks just trying to manage their mental health. But the field does not adequately define what depression is, and therefore it doesn't adequately define what it's not. Why is that important? Well, it's not all that important because we want people to get help. And so we don't want people micromanaging. Is this depression? Is it not? For example, is this anxiety? Is it not? But on the other hand, it does a great disservice and actually does cause harm. Because if you have one form of depression, the treatment that I would do with you is vastly different than if you had these symptoms, which coincide with the symptoms of depression, but the reason for them coming out are completely different and should be treated very differently. And so how we operationalize a variable is really important when we get to the treatment side, because not all symptoms are caused by the same antecedent. Imagine I went into a doctor's office and I said, I have a sore throat. And they said, you have sore throat syndrome. And no matter what the reason was, they treated it the same. That would be a great disservice. I'm glad people came in because they had a sore throat. So it's not, without any utility, but it does a disservice on the treatment side. Because if it's strep throat or a virus, that's a very different treatment modality. Just like if you're depressed because you're in a toxic relationship, and this is a normal, reasonable reaction to a toxic relationship, the treatment in part is to get you out of the toxic relationship. That has to be part of it. If you have hypofrontality, which is underperformance of the frontal lobe, which is the main marker of a clinical depression, a gross underperformance of the frontal lobe leading to incapacitation in one or more life areas, that treatment is very different than if you have decimated yourself through working out, through high stress job, and you have hit an exhaustion point that needs recovery. That might feel like depression, but without the hypofrontality piece of it, the treatment is very different. And so depending on the symptoms that you come in to see me with, I have to know more because I have to explain why those symptoms occurred. And according to the explanation, my treatment of that is going to be very different. So if you use an operationalization of a chair is a piece of furniture specifically designed for one to sit on, now we can designate only certain things in my office as a chair. And if we define, say, clinical depression as a state of hypofrontality leading to incapacitation in one or more life areas, now we have a tight operationalization of clinical depression. And our treatment of that is going to be unique. If I say the symptoms you present with appear to be the result of ineffective interpersonal patterns of functioning placed in your personhood as a child, and therefore you aren't effectively engaging interpersonal relationships, causing disruption and all this stuff, that has to be part of the treatment modality, and I'm going to treat that differently. And trust me, I get it. That was an earful. But or if you were under macroed, which some athletes are, they're under macroed, their protein intake is far lower than it needs to be. They are overworked because they don't engage recovery, and over an 8 to 16 to 24 week period, they hit an exhaustion point. I'm going to treat that very differently. But the manifestation of each of those might be the same symptoms of depression. So, the degree to which we effectively operationalize a variable is critical on the treatment side. Okay? Now, when we try to do research, or we try to gather data, or we try to gather statistics on, say, depression or anxiety or PTSD or ADHD or any of these diagnoses or categories, and our operationalization is weak, then even on the data and statistics side, we're going to be way off. Because if I said, I want you to measure things that you can sit on, then your statistics for what you can sit on in my office are going to be grossly different than if I said, measure the pieces of furniture, how many pieces of furniture specifically designed for one to sit on are in my office. Right? The statistics, the data are going to be vastly different. And so when we ask people, have you been depressed in the past month, past 6 months, past year? We're asking people to define it according to their own internal definition of depression. And that is not adequate when we're talking about tight data or statistics, let alone when researchers ask that, which they often do. That is a huge problem. Very rarely, if ever, have I read research on depression or anxiety or trauma or ADHD or any of these diagnoses where they operationalize a variable well enough, especially on a neurophysiological level. Well, guess what? We know the neurophysiology of depression. We know it of trauma. You out there might not, if you're watching this video. Some of you are like, we do? No, that dude doesn't know what he's talking about. Yes, actually we do. And we've known a lot of it since even the 90s. This is 30-year-old research. And so if your clinician doesn't know it, or if you're weak on it and you're a clinician, that's fine. I get it. You can learn it very simply. And so if you can understand the underlying neurophysiology and you can do your research more tightly according to that underlying neurophysiology, now we're on the explanatory side of things, not the correlational side. And our data and statistics are going to be better. And that's going to serve us better. Okay, so far the flaws are, firstly, data and statistics masquerading as research, or research not being very good at being much more correlational, which doesn't mean throw it out completely, but it's not as tight as research that is robust, it's been repeatable, and it has the explanatory variable built within it. Much better. Second, a poor operationalization of a term is going to lead to a lot of trouble down the road. Okay, third, now we got to get a little more technical. We're going to get into what's called reliability. Reliability means when you measure it each repeated time, you come up with the same conclusion. If you have a reliable measure of my height, then every time you measure my height, it should come up the same. That would be perfect reliability. But if you measure my height and on one measurement you measure me at 3 foot tall and on the next measurement you measure me at 9 foot tall, then that would be very unreliable data, right? Now, we have two forms of this that frequently aren't talked about. Reliability can be on a measurement side, and often within, say, a scale of measurement, we use something called a Cronbach's alpha. Don't worry about that if you're not a researcher or anything, but that gives you a reliability quotient, and say if it's 0.95, then we would say that has high reliability. The problem with the Cronbach's alpha is literally if I had a 10 item scale and I asked the same 10 items, then the internal reliability of that scale would be nearly perfect because I asked the same question 10 times. So you don't necessarily want a perfect internal reliability, but you do want the reliability to hold together. And then you have repeated, right? We want reliability to occur over repetition of sampling. And that's a different measurement form of reliability. But then we can also talk about reliability on a more qualitative basis, which is, how reliable. Here we might not be talking about strict data, measurable stuff. In our world, where we're not in research, we might also ask, how reliable is this news source? How reliable is this person? How trustworthy is this person? Do they show up on work on time? How reliable are they? And yeah, we could measure that. We could make a gut call. But both the research, the data, the scientists who have studied this show that our psychiatric, our psychological diagnostic systems have low reliability. They've function very poorly on a reliability level. And so for me, looking at it on a qualitative level as well, I would say there really is low reliability across different clinicians looking at the same symptoms. Because why? They're not tracing it back. They're not explaining it. They're just describing it. And the more you're in description, the less reliable it's going to be, because without an explanation, then we're absent something firm to establish it from. So if you have sore throat syndrome, how much reliability is that going to be when someone starts talking about it? Versus you took a strep test and you showed a positive result, meaning you have the streptococcus bacteria in your throat. This is strep throat. We understand what that is. That's a bacteria, and we're going to treat it with antibiotics, right? I would say because we understand the explanation, we understand what's at play, then that is going to be a more reliable form of assessment and treatment. Now, in the psychological world, if something is hypofrontality, I want to know the antecedent. If it's problems of interpersonal functioning, I want to know that as the antecedent. If it's low macros, poor sleep, and overworked, which many of my high performers come in with, I want to know that because that's the antecedent and the treatment is different. And so in order to have strong reliability of assessment and measurement on a qualitative level, the clinician needs to know what the heck they're talking about, and specifically on a neurophysiological level. If you can't trace it back to the antecedent, the neurophysiological level, then I don't fully trust the assessment, right? And nextly would be validity. Without reliability, we have no validity. And you could hear validity creeping its way into the previous discussion of reliability. They overlap because without reliability, you have no validity. And so if my assessment of you isn't based on something firm and trustworthy like applied neurophysiology, which I would even venture to say 95% of clinicians are not tracing their stuff back to applied neurophysiology, which I'm going to get a lot of hate reactions because of that. I'm not saying clinicians suck. I'm not saying that because validation, support, empathy, a real relationship, the therapeutic relationship has unbelievable positive effects. So that doesn't mean throw all therapy out. But if we want to advance as a field and we want to do better for everybody, then we need to base our assessments, base our interactions with clients and our treatments back to something firm and foundational like applied neurophysiology. And we can do that. We understand the applied neurophysiology. It just hasn't gotten out there enough in the hands of enough people. Okay. So without that reliability, there's no validity. But even if we had reliability, again, I had perfect reliability, asked the same question 10 times, perfect reliability. How valid is that, right? How much of a global assessment of functioning is that if all I asked is, do you drink 8 glasses of water every day? Do you drink 8 glasses of water every day, right? Is that really going to allow me to understand the thing we're studying? Does it have real world application? Is it valid? Is it a valid use of assessment? Does it get the job done that we need it to? And without that, we're in trouble. And again, without basing it within something firm and well studied and well understood, such as applied neurophysiology, we're going to miss a mark on all of that. Okay. Those are technicals. We're going to keep going. And you might have to watch this video several times, but hang in there. You're doing a great job. All right. The next one is called inference. When you look at statistics and you look at it's called inferential statistics, meaning whatever you did in your sampling, it was robust enough, which comes back to research. It's robust enough that you can infer to a population. If I studied one person and the effects of, say, priming, I show them positive stimuli and then I make them listen to a song and they listen to the song and I judge, how much did you like the song? If I prime them with something positive versus neutral or negative, they're going to report liking that song, whatever the song is, more positively. But if I only had a sample of one person, can I really infer that to a population? No, right? Because it might just be a quirk of that one person. It might be that one person's way of functioning. If I ask an elite ultra marathoner, hey, watch this positive video and then go out for a run and they run 100 miles, can I infer that to the population just by showing this positive video? Humans are able to therefore, right after watching this video, run 100 miles? No, because my sample was an N of 1 and included an ultra marathoner. Therefore, we can't infer to the population. So we want a robust sample. We want a representative sample of the population we're studying, and we want a sample large enough that allows us to use statistics to infer. That is woefully missing in psychological research, especially when we're talking about things like diagnoses, because our operationalization is weak. Our reliability is non-existent to minimal. Therefore, the validity is not there. And now we're trying to infer something about how humans work or about human nature in general or about how our society's functioning. No, it all falls apart. And yet we're acting like there's no problem in any of our research. There's lots of problems and we can fix it. All right. The next issue is the trap of yes, no versus how much. So, does depression exist? Hell yes. Right? To what extent does it exist? Well, now, the tighter the measurement, the tighter the operationalization, and the more specified back to human neurophysiology, the better we're going to be able to answer how much. Without that, we can't answer how much. We just know, hell yeah, it exists. Duh, we've known this for millennia. I bet when our ancestors 200,000 years ago were sitting around a campfire, I bet they already knew about depression and anxiety and trauma and this stuff. So, yeah, we know it's there, but how much and what type and what's the causal agent? Those qualifiers are really important for your mental well-being. And if we can't qualify it well, we can't really answer how much and what type and all of that. And we can't even say yes, no on an individual level, really, because we don't really know what it is we're talking about. So if I hold up a glass and you said, what's in your glass? And I say, water. Oh, okay, he's drinking water. What didn't happen? You didn't ask me how much, right? And so I may tip it over and nothing comes out. And you're like, I thought there was water in your glass. Well, I just finished drinking it and I bet there's a molecule of water in here. So therefore there's water in my glass. That's not the same qualitative thing as if I said I had a full glass of water here, right? And so how much is a more important question often than is it there or not? And then what kind of water? Is it drinkable or is it contaminated? And why is it contaminated? And contaminated with what? All of those questions matter when I'm a clinician trying to help my client, right? And so we often just ask, is depression present or not? Because we use symptoms. And if you have these symptoms, therefore it's present. But we don't really understand any of the qualities of it because, again, we're not going back to the applied neurophysiology side. And therefore, we're treating the presence as presence. Well, if this water is radioactive, don't drink it. In fact, get away from it. You see what I mean? The qualities of it matter. And we need to understand that. Okay. Next is how research can be purposefully manipulated. This is a bit of a deep dive, so give me a couple minutes here. But research can and has been manipulated. Now, some researchers have just lied and made up data. There was a famous experiment that showed prayer healed cancer. Well, it turns out that that specific research was completely fabricated. That the data that showed that prayer single-handedly healed cancer was just made up by the researcher. It was a made-up data set. And so that's not going to cut it. And so if prayer has healing qualities, we want to understand that, but we can't use data that we just made up. And it could be that prayer does have some effect because there is a social context to prayer. And we know that a social context, and I'm just talking science here. I'm not talking metaphysical. That's not my realm. So this isn't anti-religion or anything like that. What I'm talking about is the science of it, the measurable stuff. And so it could be that prayer does have an effect on healing because of the social qualities of it. And if you believe prayer has an effect on healing because of spiritual qualities, that's great. I'm not here to challenge that. I just can't measure that because it might not be as put into measurement as something like a social context. All right, enough of that. So how research can be purposefully manipulated. We're not talking about false data sets here. What we're talking about mostly in today's research is how a thing called meta-analyses can be manipulated. So there's this thing, meta-analyses, and what it is instead of doing a study of 30 people, that your sample size is an N of 30, there's 30 participants in my study, and then finding what conclusions I find, we take 30 research studies and all of each of their participants and methodologies, and we throw it into a statistical format. And so it's a study of 30 studies. That's called a many analyses, an analysis of many studies, meta-analysis. Well, here's where that's manipulatable. And we know for a fact that's been manipulated in our current day. In part by, and it's not that these things are all bad. Don't go there. I'm not saying that. But there is evidence the meat industry has manipulated. Pharmaceuticals have manipulated. And that doesn't mean meat industry is all bad. Doesn't mean pharmaceuticals are all bad. Don't even go there. But how has research been manipulated by bad actors? Well, in order for a scientist to do a meta-analysis, first of all, there's some rules to that. You can't cherry pick your studies. I can't ask, I ask a college campus, how many of you like peanut butter and jelly sandwiches? But I want the world to know that people love peanut butter and jelly. So I only ask the people who I know love peanut butter and jelly, do you like peanut butter and jelly? And I come up with a conclusion that 100% of people like peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Well, I cherry picked it. That's not good. And so as a researcher, a scientist paid by an academic institution, there's rules to this. You can't just cherry pick your studies to include in your meta-analysis. You have to give a fair range of the existing research out there. Okay, well, the meat industry knows that, right? So most meta-analyses have to include about 30 plus research experiments to include in it. So the meat industry knows that they need 15 studies that show meat has some positive effect. Great. But they know that only 10% of the research projects they fund show even negligible or minimal positive effects of eating meat. And so that's at 10%. If they need 15 studies to show up in a meta-analysis, they know they need to fund at least 150 studies so that 10 of them come up with some positive results that meat eating is good for you. And they will. And then those researchers publish those studies because they're the only ones that came up with findings. The rest of them were inconclusive. They throw those out as if they never existed. And so now we have 15 studies that show some positive effects of meat and 15 studies that show positive effects of a vegetarian diet. And that is put in a meta-analysis, and a meta-analysis will show some mixed results. That is manipulation. And certain industries do this. And scientists act oblivious to that manipulation. I don't know why. I don't know how. I honestly think there's some errors there and misunderstanding. I don't think they're evil people. I think they're scientists trying to do a good job following the rules, but we know there's some flaws in that. But let me just sidetrack here for a minute and go back to the how much. The data clearly shows that a vegetarian diet outperforms a meat diet. Clearly, this has been shown over and over again. And people who are pro-meat, I know you're going to come at me and with your research and your data and blah, 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 but you don't understand how research is made. You don't understand the effects of funding in research. You don't understand throwing out 90% of the studies that don't support your hypothesis for the 10% that do. And so, sorry, the data shows that a vegetarian diet absolutely outperforms a meat diet. But that is not the final answer, you vegetarians, because no one really said how much. Not no one. I take that back. Some people have made specific how much, right? I like eating steak every now and then. I enjoy the taste. I enjoy the preparation. I like barbecuing with my buddy. I enjoy that. So how much is vegetarian? What dosage? Where is it an acceptable harm, a barely noticeable harm, an egregious harm? When we're having these debates, it's the how much, it's the dosage, it's the what circumstances that matters. If you are facing starvation, I'd we know that meat as an initial impetus for regaining some nutrition is better just for that moment. I don't know this data. I haven't done the research. So if that's wrong, forgive me. But dosage and timing and type matter, right? High processed meat versus grass fed meat. That's type. That matters. Dosage matters. Timing matters. If you're having a workout, put your fat intake as far away from the workout as you can, because your body's not really going to process fat close to a workout. That's timing. But if you are trying to cut weight and you drop your fat intake to 0, you're screwed. That is a poor dosage, right? So timing, dosage, type, those matter. And so, yeah, vegetarianism outperforms meat, but to what extent? Under what circumstances? Those are the questions that matter most, and that's what I don't hear articulated enough in these arguments. Same with medication. I'm not anti-medication at all. It's timing, it's dosage, it's how long, it's under what circumstances. And so people claim over and over again, I'm anti-meds. No, I am not. Get out of my face, go home. You're wrong. But the length that you're on, the length of time that you're on medication, the dosage you're on, the timing of that medication, when to use it, when it's not having an effect, those things matter. And that's where applied neurophysiology comes in. And until we get that stuff right, we're just barking at each other. Forget that. Those answers matter. Okay, next, how researchers unintentionally mess things up. They do that by all the way at the beginning, not operationalizing it. All the way through this. But most importantly, researchers mess it up when they don't apply it to something firm and something real, like applied neurophysiology. And if you can't apply it to something firm and something real, then you got nothing. And, heaven forbid the field of psychology and mental health were building bridges. They'd all fall down, right? Thank God there's engineers using physics to build bridges, because the whole process is flimsy. Now, solutions. We can do much better than this, and the data is there. We almost perfectly understand the applied neurophysiology side. Does that mean neuroscience has figured everything out? Hell no. There's so many. When I read a neuroscience article with its 16-syllable words, I don't know what the heck they're talking about. I'm not a neuroscientist. And there's a lot in the brain that has to be figured out yet. But I'm not a neuroscientist. I function within the applied neurophysiology side of the world. Much or most of that has been figured out, and the data goes back to even the 90s or before. And so we have at least 80% of the applied neurophysiology that we need to explain this stuff. At least 80% for most things. Depression, trauma, anxiety for sure, right? Some of the details and antecedents of active schizophrenia, positive symptoms, hallucinations, and such haven't been quite nailed down to my understanding, right? There's still holes in that. But some of this, I would say we're at least 80% there, maybe further. So I hope you enjoyed this walkthrough. Haters, I'm going to read the comments, and most of you, I'm going to literally roll my eyes at you because I swear someone once said, he said depression doesn't exist. If you heard depression doesn't exist from this video, I don't know what planet you're sitting on. I'm a psychologist. I'm a human being. I know on a very practical, experiential level that depression exists. I know as a psychologist and a treatment provider, depression exists. What I'm trying to do is to say, here are the errors in the research. And folks, we can fix this stuff. And until we do, we're doing a disservice to ourselves, to our clients, to our research methodologies, to the whole gamut of things. So look for the other videos. They're going to rock your world as well.